Welcome back to the channel and welcome to episode 20. Hey Keith, do you recall our topic for today?
Well, actually, I don't remember.
You've got to be kidding me. We just discussed this in our pre-recording meeting today.
Gotcha. Yeah, I couldn't resist. See, it's funny because we're talking about memory today, but yet I forgot the topic.
Yeah, I'm not even a little amused.
Wow, the fun factor really is slipping away from you in your old age.
What? How can you say I'm not fun?
Oh, I'm just saying.
Oh, well, as long as you're just saying, we're good.
So, we've got a memory card showdown.
Heading for a showdown.
Why, yes, we do. We're going to put a couple of CF Express and SD cards to some performance tests. Now, no one's expecting the SD cards to beat the CF Express cards' performance, but it does give us a chance to illustrate how much faster these new cards are. And we're going to explain some of the performance nomenclature that's included on some of these cards and see how they perform against those rated standards.
Okay, great. So here's a question. Given that neither one of us owns a camera that uses a CF Express card, how are we going to measure the performance statistics of these cards, and how they perform in camera?
Fantastic segue, Keith. We have two
Yes, it's two, haha.
USB card readers. Both are USB 3.1 Gen 2 or 3.2, it's the same standard, which is the fastest USB standard that's available as of recording today.
Okay, interesting. So it sounds like we're going to have a couple of different types of cards and that we're going to test them in a couple of different types of, a couple of different PCs perhaps, and a couple of different types of USB card readers. And so by testing both cards in each of those systems, we'll be able to verify whether or not results are being skewed by a particular setup or not.
You nailed the landing, Keith. Even the Russian judge is going to have to give you a good score.
Yes! So, do we have any concerns about USB itself being a limiting factor in these tests?
That's a great question, Keith. We're going to test my laptop that has a USB 3.1 Gen 1 USB port rated for 5 gigabits per second. As well, we're going to test my desktop PC, which has a USB 3.1 Gen 2 or USB 3.2 USB port rated at 10 gigabits per second. The cards that we are testing are rated anywhere from 170 megabytes per second to 1700 megabytes per second on the read speed. I'm going to put up a graphic to help illustrate this information for you. As you can see from this graphic that I've put up, the fastest card that we're going to test can read at over 1700 megabytes per second and write at up to 1630 megabytes per second. Now, as I mentioned, my desktop computer has a 10 gigabyte per second USB 3.1 Gen 2 or sometimes called USB 3.2 USB-C port. That 10 gigabits per second translates into a maximum of 1250 megabytes per second. So we'll really push that USB port on our tests potentially based on the maximum read and write speeds of our fastest card. My laptop computer, however, has a slower 5 gigabit per second USB 3.1 Gen 1 USB port. That 5 gigabits per second translates into 625 megabytes per second. We'll see if that really makes a big difference or not based on the numbers that we see with the laptop and the desktop. And as a side note, any limitations that we see using these USB ports will be consistent across all the cards that we're testing.
Holy cow, that is a huge amount of data and a lot of numbers that we're talking about here. So Nessa was asking for a friend, why do we even need the faster cards to begin with?
That's another great question. Let's look at a chart for the brand new A7S3 video-centric powerhouse camera that is being released at the end of September and was just recently announced. It's capable of recording 120 frames per second and 60 frames per second in high-quality 4K video. That is a ton of data, and that's not even necessarily the highest bitrate recording mode that it's capable of recording in, and that's going to have an incredible thirst for transfer speed on its data card. So as you can see from this graphic, the highest bitrate recording mode listed is going to be 600 megabits. That translates into a 75 megs per second transfer speed requirement.
Okay, well, that doesn't seem so bad. So why is Sony even introducing these CF Express Type A cards anyway?
Boy, you're loaded with great questions today. So Sony has actually got some recording modes on their camera that are going to require 1200 megabits per second transfer rate. And so 1200 megabits translates into about 150 megabytes per second. As well, let's take a look at the chart for the Canon R5 that is newly released, and some of the numbers that are on this chart are really going to shock you a bit. So looking at the chart, the R5 is capable of recording 8K raw video at 30 frames a second. To do so requires storage capable of writing 2600 megabits or 325 megabytes per second, or more than 4 times the Sony data rate for the 4K 60 video, or more than double the 150 megabytes per second we just discussed required for the Sony 4K 120 when you put that on a 24 frame per second timeline.
Okay, yeah, now I get it. So these new recording standards are really the pathway to getting higher quality video at higher frame rates. So then there's the question, if these memory cards are rated to handle that, why aren't we even doing this video to begin with?
Well, quite frankly, it's difficult to find the minimum recording speeds for many of these cards. They love to quote the maximum or burst recording speeds. As you can imagine, if a card can burst to say 325 megs per second, but can't sustain that, and let's say 10 seconds into a recording, for example, it dips down to say 200 megabytes per second, what do you think that's going to do to our recording?
You know, well, obviously that's going to disrupt the process of writing the video to the card. You know, I think it's kind of clicking for me now as I'm saying this, that if the maximum amount of record burst speed that's written to the card isn't able to be maintained or sustained throughout the entire process of recording the video, that's going to be a major problem. I can imagine the recordings will probably just stop. Yeah, so, you know, what we're doing here today is actually really important.
Thanks. I'm glad you approve. And I apologize that we can't test every card that's on the market for these new cameras. What we can do is give you some samples of cards that may work for you and give you a testing methodology you can use for yourself. I would recommend testing any card you purchase using this methodology, and any card that doesn't meet the minimum standards, send that back.
Makes perfect sense. Now, I believe you promised me a showdown between the cards that we do have available today.
Heading for a showdown.
That I did. So let's go ahead and introduce the contenders for today.
In this corner, weighing in at 1,730 megabytes per second, we have...
Keith, what are you doing?
Well, I don't know. I was just sticking with the showdown theme. I don't know. Was that too much?
Maybe just a little bit.
Okay. Stick in the mud.
What was that? I didn't catch it.
Oh, I just said thanks for letting me know, bud.
So just a reminder here. We have 2 SD cards, one UHS 1 and one UHS 2. These are cards that you can use in any SD-equipped camera, and whether they're actually suitable for that particular camera really depends on the speed requirements of the device itself. Both these cards should actually work in the new Sony a7S III. Depending on the video mode that you choose, you may actually have to opt for the faster UHS 2 type cards. So let's cover some memory card basics before getting into the specific card rating numbers for the cards we'll discuss today. SD cards give you some nice information printed right on the card to understand what the minimum write performance for the card will be. So along with all the other numbers on the card measured in megabytes per second, we really need to pay attention to the V rating. Here we have the SanDisk UHS 1 card shown. Notice the 170 megabytes per second transfer is showing very prominently. But also notice the V30 shown. The V number shown is a rating of the minimum write speed of the card. This number is critical to writing video to the card. That means any camera we use this card in shouldn't require more than a 30 megabyte per second or 240 megabit per second transfer rate. If it does, this card will not be suitable. The ProGrade 256 gig UHS 2 card shown has a 250 megabyte per second write speed on the card. The card has a V90 rating. This means the card has a minimum write speed of 90 megabytes per second and is suitable then for a maximum of 720 megabits per second video camera data stream. So for SD cards, you'll see them rated either a V30, V60, or V90. The number following the V denotes the megabytes per second minimum write speed. What we're going to test is how these cards compare in the real world against their stated specs, including their V rating. Now, when we talk about the CF Express cards, we have a totally different story. Perhaps we'll get a standard V rating down the road, but today we just have the max read and write speeds, and some cards will list on their websites the minimum write speeds, but not all manufacturers provide that information. This is exactly why we developed this test and think that you need to test some of these cards prior to really trying to put them in use. I wouldn't want to pop a card in at, say, a wedding shoot, for example, and hope that that card actually has the write speed capabilities to keep up with what I'm trying to record. Now, our tests are relying on the card readers, and these cameras may actually have faster access to the cards than our readers do. So we'll see if that USB interface and the card being in a card reader has any impact on their performance. So we did say that we are going to share our testing methodology with you. We are using a utility that's available for free download called Crystal Diskmark. You can see from the disk benchmarks that we are publishing that we are using version 6.0.2. We'll put a link in the description so that you can download this software for yourself and do your own testing for the cards that you intend to purchase. Now, we don't have any of the CF Express Type A cards that Sony is implementing for the first time in the A7S3. These cards are brand new. They actually have not been released yet, and the only ones that are out there are in the hands of people that are testing the A7S3 in pre-production mode. As well, there's no card reader yet available for them, so we really excluded them from our testing. What is probably important to note is Sony right now is going to be the only manufacturer of those cards until other manufacturers decide to produce them, and most of the Sony A7S3 video modes will write to an SD V90 card. So you do have options available. There is just a few exclusions. Those cards, when they're released, at least day one, are going to come in an 80 and a 160 gig format. One thing I'll warn you about, if you think the CF Express Type B cards are expensive, the brand new CF Express Type A's are really expensive, and that's for a very small card. Like I said, 80 or 160 gigabytes.
Okay, so how about we jump into those testing results for a bit and see what the numbers look like.
So as we jump into the results, we're actually going to go card by card, installed in each reader attached to each computer, both the laptop and the desktop. So I think the important takeaway here is, at least with this particular card in each of the readers attached to both the laptop and the desktop, the Weiss reader was significantly slower in both instances, right? So attached to the 5 gigabit USB and the 10 gigabit. So it really didn't seem to be bound by USB in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so here I think the Weiss reader really kind of redeems itself a bit. It's very consistent with the ProGrade on the laptop. Not really sure exactly what happened to the ProGrade attached to the desktop. We see a significantly lower transfer rate, both for the writes and reads, when connected to the desktop. Not really sure what's happening here. Otherwise, this card really seemed to perform pretty well, right? So definitely well above the V90 rating that it has, which again, as a reminder, is 90 megs per second transfer rate. So although the ProGrade attached to the desktop has a much lower transfer rate, it's still well above the V90 rating. This is some interesting data. This is a case where the ProGrade CF Express card did well, right, on all the card readers, but really performed at its best in the ProGrade reader. And I think we're probably hitting just a little bit of the USB limitations on the laptop compared to the desktop PC. So as we look at the data, one thing that really jumps out is, really across the board, the Weiss reader has significantly less performance. Still good performance, but significantly less performance than the ProGrade reader did with the ProGrade card. Okay, so once again, the ProGrade reader shines, and really shines when attached to the desktop PC. Here, I think that extra USB capability is helping us. Not really sure exactly what happened to the Weiss reader, but I will tell you that looking over at the ProGrade side compared to the Weiss reader, the Weiss was pretty disappointing. I'm, looking at these numbers and going, I'm not sure that that I keep the Weiss reader at this point, just because that is a pretty significant differential in performance. When you're talking about read speeds of 151 attached to the laptop versus 431, and then 301 compared to 374, not as big a delta there, but that read is significant. And then when we drop down and look at the desktop attached to the Weiss reader, and we get 182 of read, 332 of write, compared to over 600 read and write with the ProGrade attached to the desktop, that's amazing, right? So this card with that reader is really showing some pretty amazing performance, and the Weiss reader is really significantly letting me down at this point. So Keith, now that we've gone through all of these numbers, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, there are some interesting results in there. It looks like a couple of those cards just didn't like that Weiss reader, is one thing I noticed. Got a bit of a stink eye for the Weiss reader. And I also noticed that was it the UHS-2 ProGrade card didn't like the ProGrade reader. That was also a little bit weird.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I shared my thoughts when we were going through the numbers that, it's a little ironic that the ProGrade 256 gig card didn't work well in the ProGrade reader, or at least as well. Still gave good results, but not the results it got in the Weiss. Everything else, the Weiss did not do particularly well. One thing that, really I did not talk about up to this point was when I first tried to start using the ProGrade card and test it, I put it in the ProGrade reader and the system wouldn't actually recognize the card. Even told it to look for a new card, and it wouldn't find it. I put it into the Weiss and it said that the new card was found, but it needed to be formatted. So that's kind of another ironic point, that the ProGrade card in the ProGrade reader, it wouldn't recognize it until it was formatted someplace else. Might be one of those instances where if you get that card, you have that reader, you may end up having to put it in camera, format it, and then you can do some testing with it if you want to test it on the front end.
I think this also kind of leads me to another type of recommendation with respect to all this stuff, right? When you buy your cards, it makes sense to test them, in the way that we tested them to see how they work for your situation. But also for your camera, right? When you buy these cards, put them in your camera and make sure that they work for you, for your intended use case, whether it's photos or videos in the particular video mode that you like to shoot in. And, also, we should mention, we were kind of bragging on the CF Express card of the Delkin, how it got to 600 ish, read and write speeds. But remember, the stated speeds, the maximum burst speeds that they were printing on these cards was like 1400, 1600, right? So that kind of underscores the other point we were making, is that the stated maximum speeds written on these cards are not really what you should be focusing on, at least when it comes to video performance.
I think that's great advice. Let's face it, when it comes down to it, knowledge is power. And with the cost of some of these cards, it's important to know if they're actually going to fit the need that you intend them to use them for, because it's too much money to not have them work the way that you need them to.
Yeah, and since we can't possibly test every card available out there, giving you the right idea about how to go about testing things for yourselves is pretty helpful.
Yes, you could possibly say that this was our Teach a Person to Fish episode.
I suppose you could. You know what else we could let people know about?
What's that?
That we have come to the end of another episode of Dad's Talk Tech.
Well, then I guess we better thank everyone for joining us today. As well, we've put affiliate links to the products we discussed, and we've put a link to the resources we used for our testing. If you're new to the channel or just been lurking for a while, if you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing.
As well, if you've enjoyed all of this technical mumbo jumbo, and even if you haven't, the fact is, you're actually still watching this right now, so get it over with. Just hit the like button, please, and click the little bell, right, so you get notified the next time you log into YouTube. And for Keith and Bruce, thanks for joining us, and you'll see us next time on Dad's Talk Tech.